First of all, Mr. Ashraf, my condolences on your country's losses with the recent bombings that occurred, Mr. Haidari. Clearly, there is an issue between the Taliban and ISIS. What are your thoughts on the attacks that happened yesterday?
Well, thank you so much for your expression of condolences to the suffering people of Afghanistan. As the world has been watching, yesterday saw very horrific, tragic terrorist attacks on crowd of innocent civilians trying to escape in search of protection abroad. It killed over 100 Afghans, and the numbers could only keep rising because remember that usually in circumstances in Afghanistan, even those who get wounded, unfortunately, either due to a lack of proper equipment and medical treatment and surgical treatments, or simply because they cannot get to the hospital in the right hospital in time, they also lose their precious lives. So these attacks have been happening in Afghanistan. Afghans are not new. I remember the past 3 months that Afghans experienced extremely violent from Afghanistan. So yes, these victims were just innocent civilians of the same people who've been losing lives over the past 20 years, of course, the past 3 months. And this is just a continuation of terrorism and extremism that enables terrorism, unfortunately, in Afghanistan.
With regards to the situation with the regime, has the Taliban contacted you, and have they given you or the embassy any specific orders or started any form of communication with you?
What they would communicate, of course, and that would happen following the formation and establishment of an inclusive government that represents all Afghan voices, and then, of course, be recognized by the international community before they can begin communicating with the embassies.
Have they asked you to return? What is the status of the embassy right now here in Sri Lanka?
No, they haven't asked anyone to return, nor they could do so simply because they're not recognized by anyone yet. And they're very far from international recognition. There's so many conditions and very basic conditions of meeting human rights and women's rights, and as well as agreeing to consolidate the gains of the past 20 years. And those are all about ensuring, basic peaceful life for the Afghan citizenry.
US blames Afghanistan for not protecting the country, and they say that they paved the way for Taliban to take over by leaving the country. What is your stance on US leaving the nation and President Biden's latest remarks?
Well, there's so many actors and stakeholders that can be blamed, but the amount of blame is not equally distributed. I think there are actors that bear a lion's share of the blame, and now increasingly guilt for abandoning Afghanistan prematurely in the hands of terrorists and extremists. And we saw the result. We saw the consequence just yesterday before actually enabling the Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process to produce the results. And as a result, attacks were launched not only on your forces, but also on your people of all ethnicities. And that's why your government decided to, continue fighting until you defeated them. And as a result, Sri Lanka's advice has always been for Afghanistan and other countries that you cannot talk to terrorists that will never come around and make peace. And I think that message was also for the United States to really take the Afghan peace process responsibly and seriously, and to work with the Afghan government and the Afghan people. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. We saw the Trump administration completely sidelined the Afghan government. And then, of course, the Biden administration did the same thing. And as a result, this fiasco was unfolded where everyone is desperate. Everyone is crying for a solution, which is not so much in the hands of the Afghan people. The Afghan people are the victims. We are the losers. We're losing our lives in our country and everything that we have achieved over the past 20 years. The Afghan people unfortunately. Remember that we've been suffering for the past 40 years, and so many actors have been involved, but none of them have really put Afghans before their self-interest. And as a result, that has gotten us where we are today. And from now on, we encouraged him. We encouraged him now. The UN Secretary General just called for an immediate meeting of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And I think it's a perfect opportunity to take tangible steps.
Your president left the country. He says he left because he wanted to prevent bloodshed in the country. Afghanistan, as a nation, he says, failed in politics and government leadership. How do you feel about the transition and his words, Mr. Haidari?
The president could have stayed, and of course, there are many questions. It is also correct that Adi stayed, and I think where the situation had developed to the point where he decided to leave, that it could have also led to more bloodshed. Adi stayed, that would have meant if he wanted to continue defending Kabul and the people of Kabul and the people of Afghanistan. So that would have meant street-to-street fighting and distraction and killing and bloodshed of the civilians. So he is right in that regard.
Is with regards to our Sri Lankans living there. How safe are the Sri Lankans living there right now? And what are their conditions as of now? Are those not repatriated at risk?
Absolutely, they are at risk. There is no guarantee as far as their safety and security. They could have jobs that, for which they may be attached, and financially speaking, Sri Lanka currently is going through a lot of financial problems simply because of COVID lockdowns and closures. A lot of people lost their jobs. If there is any reason for the Sri Lankans, those few Sri Lankans willing to stay back, I think it has a very financial reason to it. I doubt that they are staying there because they feel safe. It's simply because in many cases, if they are working with international organizations or some foreign, funded or implemented project, they tend to have bigger salaries, which they would never be able to get in Sri Lanka or maybe other parts of the world as we speak. And so they're clinging onto those big salaries and hoping that that nothing would happen to them. But a lot of them have come back.
What will happen in the future with women and children? Islamic scholars and the Taliban have said that they will provide rights to women and children. To what extent do you think this will be true?
It's not true because they said themselves that these are limited rights or rights within their definition of what those rights are. So, their definition of human rights and women's rights differ from those of ours. Remember, one reason they disagree with the Islamic constitution of Afghanistan is simply because of that. Our constitution is very much based on the core tenets and principles of Islam and Sharia and the Holy Quran and the Sunnah and deeds of Prophet Muhammad and Afghanistan's culture and traditions and customs, and as well as our obligations under international law. So we have the best and most progressive and all-inclusive and comprehensive constitution. So the Taliban really have no reason to tamper with it, to change it. But unfortunately, they are intent on doing that simply because their definition of human rights is different.
What is your policy? Who will you be answering to? Are you going to follow the orders of the new government with Taliban, or which regime? Which regime do your loyalties lie? Mr. Ashraf Ghani's or the Taliban?
Well, no, the loyalty really lies with the Afghan people. I represent the Afghan people. I'm a foreign service officer. I'm not a political appointee. So civil servants, foreign service officers of different countries, their loyalty and commitment foremost lie with the best interests of the people. And those interests are just, basic human rights and access to those rights. And when we talk about an inclusive and representative government, that's what we mean. That such a arrangement should foremost serve those basic human rights of the Afghan citizens. So that has not now come into existence. We are just waiting and watching for that to happen. If that happens, then naturally, we are part of such an arrangement because we ultimately, the Taliban and everyone else, would be working for the people. If it doesn't happen, if it remains to be just one-sided and representing foreign interests as opposed to the interests of the Afghan people, and you have seen that here in Sri Lanka, and you went through 3 decades, and you know exactly what I mean. And so that's why you continued fighting until you actually were assured that this country, this government belongs to you, and that you, whether you're inside the government or outside the government, you work together to represent and serve the interests of the people.
So thank you very much, Mr. for joining with us with Hiru TV News. And my name is Sandro Satyajit for the Hiru TV News team, ending this interview.